The outcasted black woman stood in the ranch kitchen that no one else would work, wooden spoon gripped like a weapon against the chaos surrounding her. Smoke billowed from forgotten pans. Grease pooled on the massive iron stove. The air hung thick with the stench of spoiled meat and burning onions. Dutch McCready towered in the doorway, his face the color of heated metal. His boots struck the wooden floor with deliberate force. Each step sent tremors through the hanging pots. "You serve what I tell you to serve." Ellie's shoulders straightened. The spoon remained steady in her weathered hands. Behind Dutch, ranch hands pressed against the kitchen entrance like cattle sensing a storm. "I won't poison good men." The words fell between them like stones into still water. Dutch's jaw worked silently. His fingers drummed against the doorframe. "This is my ranch, my rules." Ellie's eyes never left his face. The kitchen had gone, quiet except for the hiss of overheated metal. Even the flies seemed to pause their endless circling. "This is my kitchen." Arthur stepped forward from the crowd of watching men. His weathered hat sat crooked on his graying head. The foreman's presence shifted something in the room's weight. "Dutch, the men respect Miss Ellie's cooking. Maybe we ought to listen." Dutch's attention snapped to Arthur like a whip finding its target. The friendship between them stretched, taut as old rope. Years of shared work and mutual respect hung in the balance. "You taking her side against me?" Arthur's hands rested easy at his sides. No challenge in his posture, just quiet certainty. "I'm taking the side of not getting my men sick." The ranch hands murmured agreement. Dutch's eyes swept over them, cataloging faces, measuring loyalty, finding it wanting. "Fix this mess or you're all out by morning." He turned and stalked through the kitchen doorway. His boots echoed down the long hallway until distance swallowed the sound. The men remained, clustered at the threshold, uncertain. Ellie set down the wooden spoon. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, rescuing what could be saved from the burning pans. Steam rose around her like morning mist. Lara emerged from the back of the crowd. The lean woman's eyes held the hardness of someone who'd seen too much. Her calloused hands spoke of work that went beyond typical ranch duties. "You got steel, I'll give you that. But you just painted a target on your back." Ellie scraped charred onions into the waste bucket. The metal spoon rang against the iron pan. Target was already there. "Least now I know where I stand." Arthur approached the stove. His presence brought calm the way deep water brings silence. "What do you need to make this right?" "Fresh meat. Clean vegetables. Men willing to eat what I cook." "You got the last." "One easy enough." Joel shuffled forward, his aged frame bent but not broken. White whiskers framed his sun-weathered face. "Been here 15 years, seen 3 cooks come and go." Dutch broke every one of them. Ellie's hands never stopped moving. She organized salvageable ingredients with the precision of someone who'd learned to waste nothing. "I ain't the breaking kind." That's what the others said. Others weren't me. The quiet certainty in her voice made several men nod. Arthur pulled off his hat and ran weathered fingers through his hair. "What made you take this job?" Everyone in 3 counties knows about Dutch's temper. Ellie's hands stilled for just a moment. Something passed across her face like cloud shadow over prairie grass. Sometimes the job nobody wants is the only job there is. She reached into her apron pocket, checking that a folded letter remained safely hidden. The paper crinkled under her touch. Whatever secrets it held would stay buried for now. "I can have supper ready in 2 hours. Won't be fancy, but it'll be clean." Arthur nodded and gestured to the men. "You heard her. Give Miss Ellie room to work." The ranch hands dispersed slowly, their voices carrying speculation and something that might have been hope. Lara lingered near the kitchen entrance, her sharp eyes studying Ellie with calculating interest. "You're not what you seem." Ellie began chopping fresh vegetables with quick, efficient strokes. "None of us are." Some secrets are more dangerous than others. The knife never paused in its rhythm. Onions fell away in perfect, even slices. Good thing I'm not keeping any secrets then. Lara smiled without warmth. Sure you're not. She turned and followed the others out into the fading afternoon light. Arthur remained, his hat turning slowly in his hands. Dutch wasn't always like this. Men change, sometimes for the better. Sometimes they don't. Ellie swept the chopped vegetables into a large pot. Steam rose as they hit the heated oil. The sound was like rain on a tin roof. Then I'll work with what I've got. Arthur watched her work with growing respect. Her movements held the confidence of someone who'd learned to make miracles from scraps. You need anything, you let me know. I need Dutch to stay out of my kitchen. That might be harder than feeding 50 hungry cowboys. Ellie's laugh held no humor. I've done harder things. Arthur settled, his hat back on his head. I believe you have. He left her alone with the cooking pots and the weight of unspoken promises. Outside, the Montana sky was turning the color of old blood. Soon darkness would claim the ranch, and with it would come the first real test of her resolve. Ellie stirred the vegetables and tried not to think about the letter in her pocket, or the stranger who'd been asking questions in the last town, or the way Dutch's eyes had promised retribution for her defiance. She'd survived worse than angry cowboys and cruel bosses. The scars on her hands told stories of struggles that made kitchen fires seem like gentle warmth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tonight, she had supper to cook and a place to sleep. For now, that was enough. The kitchen began to smell like home. 1 week earlier, Ellie had walked through dust that tasted of desperation and dying dreams. Her boots left shallow prints in the hard pan earth, leading to Blackwater Ranch. The sun pressed down like a flat iron against her shoulders. Behind her lay the town of Cedar Falls, where accusations had followed her like wild dogs. The sheriff's words still echoed in her memory. Theft, they'd called it. The missing jewelry from the mayor's wife. The convenient timing of her arrival. And the discovery of the loss. No one had listened when she'd protested her innocence. No one had cared about the truth buried beneath their suspicions. The ranch house rose from the prairie like a ship's hull against an endless sky. Smoke curled from the kitchen chimney. The smell of burned coffee drifted on the wind. Dutch McCready had studied her with eyes that weighed and measured. His questions had been sharp as winter wind. Why did she want the job? Where had she come from? What made her think she could handle his kitchen? Ellie had answered with the careful truth of someone who'd learned to parse words for survival. She could cook. She could work. She needed employment. What she hadn't mentioned was the letter folded in her coat pocket. The one that had found her in Cedar Falls just before the accusations began. The one that made sleeping in unfamiliar places feel dangerous. Dutch had hired her on the spot. Not from kindness, but from necessity. The desperation in his voice had been carefully hidden beneath gruff authority. Last 3 cooks didn't last a month. Kitchen work is hard here. Hours are long. My standards are high. Joel had found her that first evening, sitting on the kitchen steps watching stars emerge from the darkening sky. His weathered face had held the patience of someone who'd outlasted many storms. You seemed different from the others. Ellie had continued watching the stars. Different how? They came here running from something. You came here running to something. His words had settled between them like dust after a passing rider. True enough to sting. Close enough to danger to make her careful. Maybe I'm just running. Joel had shifted on the step beside her. His joints creaked with the sound of old wood under pressure. Dutch wasn't always cruel. His daddy beat him near to death every day for 10 years. Some wounds don't heal right. That excuse cruelty? Don't excuse it, just explains it. The old cowboy had pulled out a worn photograph. A young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. This was his wife, Sarah, died in childbirth 5 years. Back, baby too. He's been angry at the world ever since. Ellie had studied the photograph in the fading light. The woman's face held the peace of someone who'd known love. What happened to the other cooks? First one quit after Dutch threw a plate at the wall. Second one lasted 2 weeks before he made her scrub the entire kitchen with a toothbrush. Third one he worked 16 hours a day until she collapsed. Why are you telling me this? Joel had tucked the photograph away. Because you got something in your eyes that wasn't in theirs. Something that don't break easy. That night, Ellie had unpacked her few belongings in the small room off the kitchen. The space smelled of lye soap and loneliness. A narrow bed. A washstand. A single window that looked out on the horse corral. She'd hidden the letter beneath the mattress. The paper had grown soft from handling. The words written in careful script spoke of danger and duty and choices that couldn't be. Undone. Morning had brought her first real test. Breakfast for 50 men. Dutch had watched from the doorway as she'd worked, his presence heavy as storm clouds. Every movement had been scrutinized. Every decision questioned. Coffee's too weak. She'd added more grounds. Eggs are too dry. She'd adjusted the heat. Biscuits are taking too long. She'd worked faster. The ranch. Hands had eaten with the grateful silence of men who'd grown accustomed to poor meals. Their appreciation had been measured in clean plates and requests for seconds. Dutch had found fault with everything. The timing, the presentation, the way she'd arranged the serving dishes. His criticism had been relentless as August heat, but she'd endured, made adjustments, learned his patterns. By the end of the first week, she'd established routines that worked. The kitchen had become her domain. The men had begun to trust her cooking. Even Laura had started helping with the heavy lifting. Arthur had taken to lingering after meals. His presence brought calm to the chaos of serving time. He'd asked careful questions about her past, probing gently for information she wasn't ready to give. You cook different than the others. More care in it. Food deserves respect. Where'd you learn to cook this good? Ellie had continued cleaning without looking up. Here and there, the answer had been true enough. She'd learned from necessity, from hunger, from the knowledge that good food could bring people together when words failed. What she hadn't mentioned was the other skills she'd learned. The ones that made her dangerous to certain people. The ones that had put her name on wanted posters in 3 states. Yesterday, a stranger had ridden through asking questions. Tall man with cold eyes and a badge that caught the light wrong. He'd spoken to Dutch in low tones before riding on. Ellie had watched from the kitchen window as dust swallowed his horse. The letter under her mattress had seemed to burn with significance. Tonight, she'd found the poster tucked under her door. Her own face stared back at her from the crude drawing. The words beneath spoke of crimes and rewards, of justice and capture. She'd burned it in the kitchen fire before anyone could see. The paper had curled and blackened, releasing secrets into smoke. But the knowledge remained. Someone was looking for her. Someone who'd found her trail. Dutch's cruelty had become the least of her problems. The job nobody wanted might be the only thing standing between her and a rope. The kitchen fire crackled with consuming hunger. Outside, wind moved through the grass with the sound of whispered warnings. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of her resolve. But tonight, she had shelter, purpose, the fragile beginning of something that might become belonging. The wanted poster was ash. The letter remained hidden. And somewhere in the darkness, danger rode closer with each passing hour. The men spoke her name now when they asked for seconds. Not miss or woman or hey you. Ellie, the sound of it had weight in their mouths, respect earned through cornbread that didn't crumble and stew that stuck to their ribs. Arthur lingered after the evening meal, turning his hat in weathered hands. The kitchen had grown quiet except for the scrape of her knife against the cutting board. Tomorrow's vegetables fell into neat piles under her steady blade. I got something to ask you. Ellie's hands never paused. Carrots gave way to onions with mechanical precision. Ask it then. Could you teach me to read? The knife stilled. Arthur's face held the flush of a man admitting weakness. His fingers worked the hat, brim into soft curves. Figured a man my age ought to know his letters. Ellie set down the knife. The weight of his request settled between them like shared burden. What makes you think I can read? Way you handle yourself, way you organize things. Got the marks of learning on you. She wiped her hands on her apron. The gesture bought time to consider. Teaching him meant trust. Trust meant danger. But the hunger in his eyes spoke of dreams deferred too long. After cleanup. Bring paper if you got it. Arthur's smile transformed his weathered face. Thank you. He left her alone with the vegetables, and the growing certainty that kindness was a luxury she couldn't afford. But his gratitude had awakened something in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the kitchen fire. Joel appeared in the doorway, his frame bent by years of hard work. His eyes held the weight of someone carrying news. Ryder came through today, asking questions again. Ellie's hands resumed their cutting. The rhythm covered the acceleration of her heartbeat. What kind of questions? About a woman. Dark-skinned, good with her hands, might be traveling alone. The onions blurred slightly. Ellie blinked away the sting. Lot of women fit that description. This one's got a particular set of skills, ones that make certain people nervous. Joel stepped closer. His voice dropped to gravelly whisper. You know anything about the Underground Railroad? The knife slipped. A thin line of red appeared on her knuckle. Ellie pressed the wound against her apron, watching red spread through white cotton. No, it helped people find freedom. Dangerous work, dangerous people involved. The kind who make enemies of powerful men. Ellie met his eyes. The old cowboy's face held understanding without judgment. What are you saying? Saying a woman like that might need friends. Might need people willing to stand with her when trouble comes. And if that woman brought trouble to good people? Joel's laugh held no humor. Good people make their own trouble. Question is whether they make it for the right reasons. He left her with the vegetables and the knowledge that her secrets were cracking, open despite her caution. The blood on her apron had dried to brown stains, evidence of vulnerability in a place where weakness meant death. Lara found her scrubbing the stain at the wash basin. Water ran pink between her fingers. The other woman's presence filled the doorway like gathering storm. You're not what you pretend to be. Ellie continued scrubbing. The stain had set deep in the fabric. None of us are. Some pretenses are more dangerous than others. What do you want, Lara? The woman stepped into the kitchen. Her boots made no sound on the wooden floor. Want to know if I should trust you. Why would you need to trust me? Because I'm not what I pretend to be either. Ellie looked up from the wash basin. Lara's face held the careful composure of someone guarding secrets. What are you then? Was a school teacher. Back in Kansas. Taught children to read and write and think for themselves. What happened? Taught the wrong children. Children whose parents didn't want them getting ideas above their station. The words hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Ellie understood the weight of helping people society wanted to keep down, the price of giving hope to the hopeless. Now you're here, now I'm here, playing cowhand and keeping my head down. Why tell me this? Lara's smile held sharp edges. Because you recognize the look. The one that says someone's running from doing right in a world that punishes righteousness. Dutch's voice echoed from the main house. Sharp commands directed at unseen targets. The sound made both women tense. He's getting worse, Lara said. Money troubles? Among other things. Ranches bleeding cash. Cattle prices are down. He's been making trips to town, coming back angrier each time. Ellie hung the wet apron on its hook. The stain had faded but not disappeared. Angry men make dangerous choices, especially when they got nothing left to lose. Arthur returned carrying a sheet of brown paper and a worn pencil. His presence shifted the room's tension. Laura nodded to both of them before disappearing into the evening shadows. "She seems to like you," Arthur said. "She's cautious." "Smart to be cautious." Arthur spread the paper on the kitchen table. The surface was rough, marked with years of hard use. "Where do we start?" Ellie sat across from him. The pencil felt familiar in her fingers. "With your name. Everything starts with knowing who you are." She wrote the letters slowly. "Our artist seeing you," each stroke deliberate and clear. Arthur watched with the concentration of a man memorizing scripture. "Now you try." His hand shook slightly as he gripped the pencil. The letters came out crooked, uncertain. But they were his letters, his name in his own hand. "Good. Practice that until it feels natural." They worked in comfortable silence. The kitchen fire crackled with drowsy warmth. Outside, wind moved through the grass with the sound of distant voices. Arthur's progress was slow but steady. His determination reminded Ellie of other students she'd taught. People hungry for knowledge that had been denied them. The memory brought both joy and pain. "Why'd you offer to teach me?" Arthur asked during a break. "Everyone deserves to read their own name." "That's not a full answer." Ellie traced patterns on the table with her finger. "Had a teacher once. She said education was the one thing they couldn't take away from you. Figured I'd pass that on." "What happened to her?" "She died, helping people who needed help." Arthur's hand covered hers briefly. The contact was warm, grounding. "She'd be proud of you." "Don't know about that." "I do." They returned to the lesson. Arthur's letters grew steadier with practice. His confidence built with each successful word. By the time they finished, he could write his full name and read simple sentences. "Tomorrow we'll work on numbers," Ellie said. "Looking forward to it." Arthur gathered his paper and pencil. The brown sheet had become precious cargo. "Ellie, whatever trouble you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone." She watched him leave, her chest tight with emotion she couldn't name. The kitchen felt larger without his presence, emptier. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. Outside, a horse approached at steady gallop. The rider's silhouette was unfamiliar against the star-filled sky. Ellie moved to the window, her hand instinctively reaching for the knife at her belt. The stranger dismounted near the main house. Even in darkness, his movements spoke of purpose, of authority, of danger riding closer with each passing hour. Dutch's voice carried across the yard, words too low to understand but sharp with tension. The conversation lasted only minutes before the rider mounted and disappeared into the night. Ellie remained at the window long after the hoofbeats faded. The letter under her mattress seemed to pulse with malevolent life. The teaching session with Arthur had reminded her of everything she'd lost, everything she stood to lose again. The kitchen fire had gone cold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of her resolve. But tonight, she'd given someone the gift of reading his own name. Whatever came next, that small victory would remain. The bounty hunter's voice carried through the kitchen window with the clarity of breaking glass. Ellie's hands stilled on the bread dough, flour dusting her dark fingers white as bone. "Woman I'm looking for helped slaves escape down south. Goes by different names, real dangerous type." Dutch's reply rumbled lower, harder to catch. But the bounty hunter's words cut through morning air with surgical precision. "Rewards $500, dead or alive." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. The dough began to stick to her suddenly damp palms. $500 would buy a lot of loyalty from desperate men. She's got skills, reading, writing, fighting when cornered. Smart enough to blend in. pretty enough to fool folks into trusting her. The kitchen door creaked. Arthur stepped inside, his face pale as winter sky. His eyes found hers across the room and held. In them she saw the terrible weight of understanding. He'd heard everything. "You need to run," he whispered. Ellie pressed, her palms flat against the wooden counter. The solid surface anchored her to the present moment, to the choice that would define everything that followed. "I'm done running." "Ellie, you don't understand. That man out there, he's not just any bounty hunter. He's got a reputation. People he brings in don't always make it to trial. Then I better make sure he doesn't bring me in." Arthur's hands clenched into fists. "This isn't a game. You could die. I've been dying for years. Moving from town to town, hiding who I am, pretending to be less than I am. At least here I've got something worth protecting." The front door slammed. Heavy boots crossed the main room, heading toward the kitchen. Dutch's silhouette filled the doorway, his face unreadable as granite. "Arthur, go check the north pasture. Take your time getting back." Arthur's jaw tightened. "Dutch, whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking you need to follow orders." The two men stared at each other across years of friendship and mutual respect. Arthur's loyalty warred with his protective instincts. The internal battle played out in the tense lines of his body. "Don't do anything stupid," Arthur said finally. He left without looking back. The kitchen door swung shut with the finality of a coffin lid. Dutch stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. So, the Underground Railroad. Ellie continued kneading the dough. The rhythm kept her hands steady when her heart wanted to race. "You believe everything bounty hunters tell you." "I believe what I see. And what I see is a woman who's too educated, too brave, and too willing to help people who can't help themselves." "That sound like a crime to you?" Dutch's laugh held. "No warmth. Depends on who's asking. Man outside thinks it's worth $500. What do you think?" "I think you're exactly what you appear to be. A woman who stood up for what's right when it would have been easier to stay quiet." The admission hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Ellie searched his face for signs of deception, found only the weary recognition of someone who understood the weight of difficult choices. "What do you want from me?" "Same thing I've always wanted. Cook my meals. Keep my men fed. Do your job. And if I refuse?" Dutch's smile held razor edges. "Then that man outside gets very disappointed. And disappointed bounty hunters tend to cause problems for everyone." The threat was clear without being spoken. Work without pay or watch good men suffer for her. Choices. Dutch had found the one lever that could move her. "How long?" "Long as it takes for him to give up and move on. Could be days, could be weeks. And if he doesn't give up, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." Dutch turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I respect what you did. Taking risks to help people who couldn't help themselves takes courage, not courage, necessity. Same thing most times." He left her alone with the bread dough and the crushing weight of renewed captivity. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd helped others escape bondage only to find herself trapped by her own conscience. The kitchen door opened again. Joel entered, his weathered face grim as winter storm. Clouds. Behind him came Lara, her hand resting on the gun at her hip. "Heard what happened," Joel said. "News travels fast. Arthur told us. Boys madder than a wet cat. Took 3 men to keep him from doing something stupid." Lara stepped forward. "We want to help. This isn't your fight, isn't it?" Joel's voice carried the weight of years spent watching injustice flourish. "You think we don't know what you did? What you sacrificed? You helped people find freedom when the law said they should stay enslaved. The law was wrong. You were right. That's all that matters." Ellie's throat tightened. The bread dough blurred through sudden tears. "Helping me could get you killed. Living with ourselves if we don't help might be worse, Lara said. The three of them stood in the kitchen's warmth, bound together by shared understanding of what it meant to choose conscience over safety. Outside, the bounty hunter's horse stamped impatiently in the yard. "What did you have in mind?" Ellie asked. Joel's smile held grim satisfaction. "That man's got to sleep sometime, and accidents happen on cattle ranches. Horses spook. Wells get contaminated. Food goes bad. I won't have you commit murder for me." "Who said anything about murder?" "Just making his stay uncomfortable enough that he decides to look elsewhere." Lara nodded agreement. "We can make this place feel very unwelcoming to the wrong sort of visitor." "And if Dutch objects?" "Dutch is a hard man, but he's not stupid. He knows which side his bread is buttered on. You keep his men fed and happy, he'll keep you safe." The bread dough had risen while they talked. Ellie shaped it into loaves with practiced efficiency. The familiar motions calmed her racing thoughts. "This won't end here. Even if this one gives up, there will be others. Then we'll deal with others when they come," Joel said. Why risk everything for me?" Joel's eyes held the weight of a lifetime spent watching good people suffer. "Because somebody has to. Because you'd do the same for us. Because it's right." The simple truth of it settled over the kitchen like benediction. Ellie had spent so long running that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have people willing to stand with her. "Thank you. Don't thank us yet. This is just the beginning." Through the window, she could see the bounty hunter watering his horse at the trough. His movements spoke of patience and professional competence. This wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in years, she wasn't facing danger alone. The kitchen that had become her refuge now sheltered allies willing to risk everything for justice. The bread went into the oven. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. By evening, the first drops of rain would fall on the dusty yard. And somewhere in the darkness, plans would be made. Loyalties would be tested. And the woman who'd helped so many others find freedom would discover whether her own chains could finally be broken. The oven's heat warmed her face. The bread would rise, and tomorrow would bring whatever came next. The dinner party guests arrived in polished carriages that contrasted sharply with the dusty ranch yard. Their voices carried the cultivated tones of people who'd never known hunger or desperation. Ellie watched from the kitchen window as Dutch greeted them with forced joviality. "Tonight you serve them directly," Dutch had commanded that morning. "No hiding in the kitchen. They want to see the help." The humiliation was deliberate, calculated. Dutch's way of reminding her exactly where she stood in his carefully constructed hierarchy. Ellie adjusted her white serving apron with steady hands. The fabric felt heavy as chains around her waist. Behind her, the kitchen held the aromatic evidence of hours of preparation. Roasted beef, fresh vegetables, bread that had risen golden and perfect. "You don't have to do this," Arthur said from the doorway. "Yes, I do. He's pushing too far. He's desperate. Desperate men do desperate things." Arthur's jaw tightened. "I could stop this, talk to him." "And accomplish what?" "He'd just find another way to break me." "You're not broken." Ellie lifted the heavy serving tray. The weight pressed against her palms, grounding her to the present moment. "Not yet." The dining room blazed with lamplight. Crystal glasses caught the flame and threw it back in fractured rainbows. The guests sat around Dutch's massive oak table, their conversation flowing over topics that revealed their privilege. "The problem with freed slaves," one man was saying, "is they don't understand their place anymore. Education has made them uppity," agreed a woman in expensive silk. "They think they deserve the same opportunities as decent folk." Ellie entered the room carrying the first course. Her footsteps made no sound on the polished wooden floor. The conversation continued around her as if she were invisible. "I've been investing in cotton plantations down south." First man continued. "Good money in it if you can find the right workers. What kind of workers? Dutch asked. The kind that don't ask questions, don't demand wages. Know their place and stay in it. Ellie set the soup bowls with mechanical precision. Each placement was perfect, professional. Her face showed nothing of the storm building in her chest. Of course you need the right kind of overseer, the woman added. Someone who understands how to maintain discipline. Discipline is everything, another guest agreed. Give them an inch, and they'll take a mile. Next thing you know, they're demanding to be treated like human beings. The laughter that followed was sharp as broken glass. Ellie continued serving, her movements steady despite the tremor in her hands. She'd heard these words before. Lived under their weight for years. The Underground Railroad caused so much trouble, the woman continued. All those bleeding hearts thinking they were helping. Really, they were just enabling disobedience. Should have hanged every one of them, the first man said. Traitors to the natural order. Ellie's hand stilled on the serving spoon. The soup trembled slightly in the bowl. Dutch's eyes found hers across the table, holding steady warning. More soup, Miss Ellie? He asked quietly. Yes, sir. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. She finished serving and retreated to the kitchen on legs that felt carved from stone. The walls pressed closer with each step. Arthur waited by the stove, his face pale with suppressed rage. I heard every word. They're entitled to their opinions. They're talking about buying people, about owning human beings. I know what they're talking about. How can you stay so calm? Ellie's laugh held no humor. Because getting angry won't change anything, won't help anybody, won't make them see me as human. Then what will? Nothing. Some people are too broken to be fixed. She prepared the second course with movements that spoke of years practicing control. The roasted beef gleamed under the kitchen lamps. Vegetables arranged in perfect patterns. Everything beautiful and precise. You're stronger than all of them combined, Arthur said. Strength doesn't matter when you're outnumbered. You're not outnumbered. Not here. The kitchen door swung open. Dutch entered, his face unreadable. They're ready for the main course. It's ready. Good. They're impressed with the food. Impressed with the service. I'm so pleased. Dutch stepped closer. I know this is hard. Know what they're saying hurts. Does it matter? It matters to me. The admission hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Ellie searched his face for signs of deception. Found only the weary recognition of someone who understood the weight of impossible choices. Why are you doing this to me? Because I need their money. Because the ranch is failing. Because sometimes good people have to do terrible things to survive. And after tonight, after you have their money? Dutch's hands clenched into fists. After tonight, things will be different. Different how? You'll see. He left her with the roasted beef and the terrible knowledge that survival sometimes required swallowing poison. The serving tray felt heavier when she lifted it. The dining room seemed brighter, more exposed. The guests had moved on to discussing investments and profit margins. Their voices carried the casual cruelty of people who'd never questioned their right to prosper from others' suffering. The key is finding the right property, one man was saying. Good soil, reliable water, and workers who understand their position. What about the law? Dutch asked. The law is what we make it. Money talks louder than legislation. Ellie served the main course with quiet precision. Each plate was a masterpiece of preparation and presentation. The guests complimented Dutch on his excellent staff. Their praise felt like acid on her skin. Where did you find her? The woman asked. She's remarkably well trained. She came highly recommended, Dutch replied. Good help is so hard to find these days. Most of them have gotten ideas above their station. Miss Ellie knows her place. The words were spoken gently, but they carried the weight of ownership. Ellie finished serving and retreated to the kitchen, her dignity intact but her spirit bruised. Arthur was waiting with Joel and Lara. Their faces held the grim determination of people who'd witnessed injustice and decided to act. "We heard enough," Joel said. "Those people are talking about buying human beings," Lara added. "In my kitchen, at my table." "Dutch's table," Ellie corrected. "Your table," Arthur said firmly. "Your kitchen, your home." "This isn't my home." "It is now." Through the kitchen window, she could see the bounty hunter's horse tied to the hitching post. The animal stamped impatiently, sensing the tension that filled the night air. "He's been asking questions all day," Joel said, getting closer to the truth. "Let him get close." "I'm done running. You might not have a choice." "There's always a choice." The dinner party laughter echoed from the dining room, sharp and cruel, and utterly without mercy. Ellie began, preparing dessert with movements that spoke of years spent transforming pain into purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of her resolve. But tonight, she would serve dessert to people who saw her as property. And she would do it with such dignity that even they would be forced to recognize her humanity. The kitchen. Fire burned steady and warm. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. And somewhere in the darkness, change rode closer with each passing hour. Dawn broke gray and cold over the ranch yard. The bounty hunter stood beside his horse, checking his saddle one final time. His movements spoke of a man preparing for a long journey or a final confrontation. Arthur emerged from the bunkhouse, carrying a leather folder thick with papers. His face held the grim satisfaction of someone who'd spent sleepless hours preparing for war. "Going somewhere, friend?" Arthur called. The bounty hunter's hand drifted toward his gun. "Just passing through." Funny thing about passing through. Sometimes you find more than you bargained for. Arthur opened the folder. The papers inside rustled in the morning breeze. Each sheet represented hours of careful investigation. Days of writing to neighboring towns. Conversations with sheriffs and telegraph operators. "Says here you're wanted for murder in Colorado. 3 counts. The bounty hunter's face went pale as winter sky. "That's a lie. Sheriff in Denver doesn't think so. Neither does the one in Boulder or the folks in Cheyenne." The folder held wanted posters with the bounty hunter's face. Witness statements. Telegraph messages from law enforcement across 3 territories. Arthur had been thorough. "You got no proof." "Got plenty of proof. Question is whether you want to discuss it with me or with the territorial marshal." Ellie watched from the kitchen window. The confrontation unfolded with the slow inevitability of storm clouds gathering. Justice arriving on schedule after years of delay. Lara appeared at the bounty hunter's shoulder. Her gun was drawn but pointed at the ground. "Nice morning for a ride, long ride, to somewhere far away. You people are making a mistake." "Mistake was you coming here," Joel said from the barn entrance. "Mistake was thinking you could take one of our own." The ranch hands had positioned themselves throughout the yard. Not threatening, just present. A wall of quiet determination that spoke louder than shouted threats. Dutch stepped onto the porch. His face held the weight of decisions made and consequences accepted. "Think you better move along, friend. Find somewhere else to conduct your business. You're harboring a fugitive. I'm protecting a woman who helped people find freedom. If that makes me a criminal, so be it." The bounty hunter's horse shifted restlessly. The animal sensed the tension radiating from every corner of the yard. Even the chickens had gone quiet. "This ain't over." "Yes, it is," Arthur said quietly. "It's over right now." The bounty hunter mounted his horse with jerky movements. His eyes swept the assembled faces, memorizing them for future reference. The threat was clear without being spoken. "You'll regret this. We'll take that chance." The horse's hooves raised dust clouds as they disappeared down the ranch road. The sound faded until only morning silence remained. Birds resumed their singing. The world continued turning. Ellie stepped onto the kitchen porch. The folder in Arthur's hands represented more than evidence. It represented people willing to fight for justice when the law failed. How long did that take? She asked. 3 days. Rode to 5 different towns. Sent a dozen telegrams. Why? Arthur's smile transformed his weathered face. Because you're worth it. Because it was right. Because somebody had to. Dutch descended the porch steps. His movements carried the weight of a man who'd made peace with difficult truths. We need to talk. The kitchen felt smaller with all of them gathered inside. Dutch stood near the stove, his hands clasped behind his back. The posture spoke of military discipline learned long ago. I owe you an apology, he said to Ellie. For what? For testing you. For making you prove your worth when you'd already proven it. For putting you through hell when you deserved respect. Why did you do it? Dutch's laugh held no humor. Because I'm a broken man who learned the wrong lessons from a hard life. Because I thought strength meant cruelty. Because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of caring about people again. Of losing someone I'd grown to respect. Of admitting I was wrong. The admission hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Ellie studied his face, searching for signs of deception. Found. Only the weary recognition of someone who understood the weight of redemption. What happens now? Now we build something better. Ranch becomes a place where people can start over. Where past mistakes don't define future possibilities. And they. Money troubles? Dutch's smile held genuine warmth. Those investors last night? They were so impressed with the loyalty of my staff that they're funding the whole operation. Seems unity is worth more than cruelty in the business world. Lara stepped forward. I've been writing to lawyers about your case. Underground Railroad. Work wasn't illegal everywhere. We can get those charges dropped. Even if we can't, statute of limitations has run out on most of it, Arthur added. You're free, Ellie. Truly free. The words settled over her like sunrise after the longest night. Free. Not running. Not hiding. Not pretending to be less than she was. What will you do? Dutch asked. Ellie looked around the kitchen that had become her sanctuary. At the people who'd become her family. At the life she'd built from nothing but determination and hope. I'd like to stay. Open a proper restaurant here on the ranch. Teach cooking to anyone who wants to learn. Women of all colors? Arthur asked. Women of all colors. All backgrounds. All dreams. Sounds perfect. 6 months later, Ellie's restaurant served travelers from across the territory. The kitchen had expanded to accommodate students who came to learn cooking and life skills. The sound of laughter echoed from the dining room where people of all backgrounds shared meals and stories. Arthur had learned to read well enough to help with the books. His partnership with Dutch had transformed the ranch into a model of fair treatment and mutual respect. The men worked harder because they were valued. Lara taught school 3 days a week to children whose parents had given up on education. Joel shared his knowledge of ranching with anyone willing to learn. The place had become a beacon of hope in a territory that had known too much despair. Dutch had learned to lead through inspiration rather than intimidation. His transformation wasn't complete, but it was genuine. The ranch prospered under his reformed leadership. Ellie stood in her expanded kitchen, watching the sun set over the Montana prairie. The wanted posters had been replaced with letters of recommendation. The fear had been replaced with purpose. She'd taken the job nobody wanted at a cruel man's ranch, found family among outcasts. Discovered that the best days of her life came not from running towards something, but from standing still long enough to build something worth keeping. The kitchen fire burned warm and steady. Outside, stars emerged from the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, new opportunities to transform lives through the simple act of sharing food and knowledge. The woman who'd helped so many others find freedom had finally found her own. in the last place she'd expected to look. Among people who understood that true strength came not from cruelty, but from the courage to change. The bread would rise, the students would learn, and the kitchen that had once been a place of trial would continue to be a place of transformation. Home at last. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.